The sky over Riverdale was tinged with orange, as Rachel, with her sun-marked face and 17 years of life, was already up and about. The first golden rays illuminated the small farm where she lived with her grandmother, Sophie. The young woman's hands, calloused from daily work, moved skillfully as she milked the spotted cow in the pen. "Grandma, Patches is giving less milk today," she commented, observing the half-full bucket. Sophie, a 70-year-old woman whose face was a map of deep wrinkles, approached, leaning on her wooden cane. "It's the changing weather, child. Animals feel it before we do." Rachel nodded, running her hand affectionately over the cow's coat. There was something in the way the young woman touched animals that made Grandma Sophie furrow her brow. It was as if a silent communication existed between them. "Take this milk inside, and then go harvest the vegetables. Today's market day," said her grandmother, moving away with short steps. Having finished her tasks in the barn, Rachel picked up the wicker basket and headed to the small garden at the back of the farm. The smell of damp earth invaded her nostrils as she harvested lettuce, carrots, and cabbages. Her ever-ready smile contrasted with the hardship of the life she led. In the distance, the sound of horses' hooves made her raise her head. 3 riders were approaching along the dirt road that cut through the Sullivan farm. Rachel immediately recognized the silhouettes: Paul and Julie Parker, accompanied by one of the foremen from the ranch. A knot formed in her throat. The Parker siblings never brought good news. They were the children of Eugene Parker, the most powerful man in the E region, owner of almost all the surrounding land. Arrogance was a family trait, as was contempt for the less fortunate. "Well, well, if it isn't old Sophie's granddaughter," said Paul, pulling the reins of his horse and stopping near the fence. His eyes traveled over Rachel's body with an interest. That made her feel uncomfortable. "Good morning, Mr. Parker," Rachel replied, trying to maintain her composure, though she felt her heart racing. "I see you're still playing farmer," Julie interjected with a disdainful smile. "Father sent us to tell your grandmother he needs to speak with her. Something about the documentation for this—" She paused, looking around with contempt. "Property." "I'll inform her, Ma'am," said Rachel, holding the basket of vegetables firmly against her chest as if it were a shield. "See how polite she is, Paul," Julie commented, laughing. "The country girl knows how to use pretty words." Paul didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on Rachel in a way that made her feel exposed. "Tell the old woman she has until the end of the week," he finally spoke, before pulling the reins and leaving, followed by his sister and the foreman. Rachel remained motionless, watching them move away. A feeling of anguish grew in her chest. It wasn't the first time Eugene Parker had sent messages about the farm's documentation. Grandma Sophie always said he wanted to take their land, as he had done with so many other small property owners in the region. "What did they want?" Sophie's voice sounded behind her. "The usual, Grandma, about the land documents." The old woman's expression hardened. "Eugene Parker won't rest until he has everything for himself." Her voice trembled slightly. "But don't worry, child. This land is ours and nobody is going to take it from us." That afternoon, after the market in town, Rachel decided to take a longer route home. She needed to pass near the border with the Parker Ranch to look for medicinal herbs for her grandmother, who suffered from joint pain. It was then that she saw him for the first time. A huge black buffalo grazed alone near the fence that divided the properties. It was an imposing animal, with wide horns and deep eyes. Rachel knew this was Thunder, the wild buffalo that no one at the Parker Ranch could completely tame. For some inexplicable reason, she felt no fear. She slowly approached the fence as if an invisible force pulled her toward the animal. "Hello, big guy," she whispered. The buffalo raised its head, its eyes meeting hers. A shiver ran down Rachel's spine. There was something in that gaze, a familiarity, a connection she couldn't explain. The buffalo walked toward her with calm steps, stopping a few meters from the fence. Rachel extended her hand, trembling slightly. "You wouldn't hurt me, would you?" she murmured. To her surprise, the animal lowered its head as if answering her question. She smiled, feeling an inexplicable peace. "Get away from him!" The shout tore through the air, making Rachel jump back. Carl Parker, Eugene's youngest son, emerged from among the trees, walking hurriedly in her direction. "That animal is dangerous," he warned, approaching cautiously. "He's already injured 3 men from the ranch." Rachel looked at the buffalo, which remained calm, its eyes still fixed on her. "He doesn't seem dangerous to me," she replied, feeling a strange confidence. Carl stopped a few steps away, looking at her with curiosity. "You're Sophie's granddaughter, aren't you? Rachel, if I'm not mistaken." She nodded, surprised that he knew her name. Carl was different from his siblings. He was rarely seen in town and, according to rumors, lived in constant friction with his father for not sharing the family's harsh methods. "You'd better go," he said, casting a worried glance at the buffalo. "My father doesn't like strangers hanging around the property." "I'm outside the fence," Rachel replied, raising her chin. "This part is still public land." A slight smile appeared on Carl's lips. "You're right, but still be careful with Thunder. He's not usually friendly." Carl moved away, casting one last look at Rachel and the buffalo, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. When he disappeared among the trees, Rachel turned back to look at the animal. "What's with you, big guy? Why does everyone fear you so much?" The buffalo snorted softly, as if answering her question. At that moment, a strange sensation ran through Rachel's body, as if an invisible thread connected her to that animal, a thread that crossed time and space, linking her to something greater, to a secret she couldn't yet understand. Night fell, over Riverdale, bringing with it the cold wind that swept across the hills. Rachel was helping her grandmother prepare an herbal tea in the small kitchen, illuminated by the kerosene lamp. "Grandma, I met the buffalo from the Parker Ranch today," she commented casually, while stirring the pot on the wood stove. The sound of the cup falling and breaking on the floor made Rachel turn around, startled. Grandma Sophie's face had gone pale. "What buffalo?" asked the old woman with a trembling voice. "Thunder. I think that's what they call him." "Her huge black buffalo. Everyone says he's dangerous, but he was gentle with me." Grandma Sophie leaned on the table, breathing deeply. Her eyes, normally serene, now carried a restlessness that Rachel had never seen before. "Stay away from that. Animal, Rachel, stay away from the Parker Ranch." Her voice sounded authoritative, different from her usual tone. "But Grandma, what?" "Don't argue." The old woman cut her off, surprising her granddaughter with her severity. Soon after, her expression softened. "Help me clean this up, will you?" As they collected the porcelain shards, Rachel felt that something was wrong. Her grandmother had never reacted that way before. There was a secret there, buried as deep as the roots of the century-old pines that surrounded the farm. The next morning, the sky dawned laden with grey clouds. Rachel was preparing to go to town to deliver vegetable orders when she heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. It was a shiny black pickup truck that contrasted with the simplicity of the farm. From it descended Eugene Parker, imposing in his 70 years, supported by an intricately carved wooden cane. A man in a grey suit accompanied him, carrying a briefcase. Rachel felt a chill in her stomach. In all her 17 years, she had never seen the Parker patriarch so close. He was an almost mythical figure in the region, spoken of only in whispers. "Good. Morning, young lady, is your grandmother home?" he asked with a surprisingly soft voice for someone with such a reputation for harshness. "Yes, sir, I'll call her." When she turned to enter the house, Eugene stopped her with a word. "Wait." Rachel froze in place, turning slowly. The old rancher's eyes studied her with a disconcerting intensity. There was something in his gaze, not the usual Parker contempt, but something deeper, like recognition. "What is your full name, young lady?" Rachel Sullivan, sir." A muscle twitched in Eugene's face. For a brief moment, his mask of serenity seemed to crack, revealing something that Rachel couldn't decipher. "Sullivan," he repeated softly. "From your mother's family or your father's?" The question caught Rachel by surprise. "My mother's, sir, Helen Sullivan. I never knew my father." Something flashed in the old rancher's eyes. Pain, guilt, but it was so quick that Rachel thought she had imagined it. Grandma Sophie appeared on the porch, leaning on her cane, her small body tense like a violin string about to break. "What do you want here, Eugene?" she asked, her voice firm despite the evident hostility. The rancher shifted his gaze from Rachel, his face returning to the impassive expression of before. "Business matters, Sophie. Can we talk in private?" The tension between the two was palpable. Rachel had never seen her grandmother so disturbed. "Rachel, go to town and make your deliveries," instructed Grandma Sophie, without taking her eyes off Eugene. "But Grandma..." "Now, girl." Reluctantly, Rachel took her bicycle and the basket with the vegetables. Before leaving, she still caught a fragment of the conversation that was beginning. "You can't just show up like this after so many years, Eugene." Her grandmother's words were swallowed by the distance as Rachel pedaled toward town, her mind buzzing with questions. In the center of Riverdale, the market was lively despite the cloudy weather. Rachel delivered the orders to her regular customers, but her mind was far away, reliving the strange interaction with Eugene Parker. "You seem worried today, girl." The voice pulled Rachel from her thoughts. It was Teresa, a lady who sold crafts, at the stall next door. One of the few people in town who always treated Rachel and Grandma Sophie with genuine affection. "Just tired, Mrs. Teresa," she replied with a forced smile. The old craftswoman narrowed her eyes. "I saw the Parker truck passing toward your farm. That family never brings anything good." Rachel hesitated, but the need to vent was stronger. "Eugene Parker showed up at our house today. He looked at me strangely, as if he knew me." Teresa remained motionless, her wrinkled fingers squeezing the embroidery she was holding. "Listen, girl," she said softly, leaning closer. "There are things in this town that have been buried for a long time. Your grandmother, she has her reasons for keeping certain silences." "What things? What is my grandmother hiding?" Teresa looked around, as if afraid of being overheard. "It's not my place to tell, but..." She hesitated. "Have you ever wondered why your mother left Riverdale?" Rachel's heart sped up. Her mother, Helen, had left when she was only 3 years old, leaving her in the care of Grandma Sophie. The few times she asked about her, her grandmother would only say that Helen had to leave to work in the city. Rachel had never received a letter, a call, nothing. "My grandma said she went to work in Portland." Teresa gave a sad sigh. "Riverdale is too small to hide certain stories forever, Rachel. Ask your grandmother about the Parkers and your mother. It's time you knew." Before she could insist, Teresa was approached by a customer, ending the conversation. Rachel finished her deliveries and pedaled back home, her head full of new questions. Asidu. She approached the farm. She noticed the truck was still there. She decided not to enter through the front. She left her bicycle hidden among the trees and circled the property, approaching stealthily to the living room window. Voices came heatedly from inside the house. "You don't have that right, Eugene." It was Grandma Sophie's voice, laden with contained anger. "After everything you did to Helen, now you want to show up like this?" "She's my blood, Sophie." Eugene's voice sounded harsh. "All these years, and you never told me the girl was here." "And what would you have done if you had known? Would you have acknowledged your bastard daughter in front of the whole town, in front of your wife and your other children?" Rachel felt the air flee from her lungs. Her legs weakened, and she needed to lean against the wall of the house to keep from falling. "Bastard daughter." "I have rights over her," Eugene continued. "She deserves to know who her father is." "Rights?" Grandma Sophie's voice rose. "What rights do you have over Rachel after abandoning a pregnant Helen, after what your family did to my daughter?" "I didn't know Helen was pregnant when she left. If I had known..." "If you had known what, Eugene? Would you have destroyed more lives besides hers?" Rachel moved away from the window, her heart pounding in her chest. The world around her seemed to spin as the pieces began to fit together. The strange looks from Paul and Julie, Eugene's sudden interest, her grandmother's reaction to the buffalo. Itimainti was all part of a larger secret, a story buried for 17 years that now surfaced like a dammed river that finally breaks its barriers. Eugene Parker was her father. She was a Parker, and somehow the Buffalo Thunder was connected to all of this. Rachel's world crumbled in a matter of seconds. The words she had heard through the window echoed in her mind like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. She staggered away from the house with her heart racing and irregular breathing, seeking refuge among the trees that bordered the farm. Eugene Parker was her father, the man the entire town secretly feared and despised, the man whose children treated her with disdain, the man who, she had just discovered, had abandoned her pregnant mother. Tears flowed freely down her face as she leaned against the trunk of an old pine tree. The sky, heavy with clouds, seemed to share her pain when the first drops of rain began to fall, mixing with her tears. Without thinking, Rachel began to run. Her feet instinctively took her along the trail that bordered the Parker property. The rain intensified, soaking her clothes, but she didn't care. She needed answers, and something inside her knew where to find them. When she reached the fence that divided the properties, she stopped, breathless. A few meters away, grazing alone under the rain that now fell heavily, was Thunder. As if sensing her presence, the immense buffalo raised its head, its eyes meeting hers. "Why?" murmured Rachel, the words almost swallowed by the sound of the storm. "Why do I feel connected to you?" She approached the fence, ignoring the mud that soiled her boots. The buffalo walked in her direction, stopping on the other side. There was a serenity in the animal's eyes that contrasted with the chaos Rachel felt inside. Without fear, she extended her hand between the slats of the fence. The buffalo approached its snout, its warm breath against the young woman's wet palm. The contact brought a wave of sensations, peace, understanding, and, surprisingly, memories that were not her own. A dark-haired woman running through green fields, laughter, a furtive kiss in the shadow of a barn. Eugene, younger, with eyes full of love and not greed, and blood, a lot of blood. Rachel recoiled, frightened by the images that invaded her mind. She staggered backward, falling seated in the mud. The buffalo remained motionless, its deep eyes fixed on her. "Get away from him!" The male voice cut through the air. Carl Parker emerged from among the trees, dressed in a raincoat, his face contorted with concern. He ran to Rachel, helping her to her feet. "Are you okay?" he asked, examining her. "I saw you running in this direction during the storm. It's dangerous to be near him, I've told you." Rachel stared at Carl, seeing for the first time the resemblance to Eugene, the same perceptive eyes, the same face shape. Her half-brother. The realization hit her like lightning. "Do you know?" she murmured. Carl frowned, confused. "Know what?" The words got stuck in Rachel's throat. How to explain what she had just discovered? How to tell this man they were siblings? "Nothing," she finally replied. "I'm just confused." Carl took off his raincoat and placed it over Rachel's shoulders. "Come on, I'll take you home. It's not safe to stay here in this storm." As they moved away, Rachel looked back one last time. Thunder remained motionless, watching her. The connection between them was something she couldn't explain, but now she was sure it wasn't coincidence. Carl took her to his jeep, parked on the dirt road. Inside the vehicle, the silence was broken only by the sound of rain on the metal roof. "My father was at your farm today," Carl commented, breaking the silence as he drove. It wasn't a question. Rachel nodded, unable to face the man beside her. "Business, I suppose?" he continued. "My father seemed disturbed when he returned." "Why are you different from them?" The question escaped before Rachel could contain. As Carl looked at her, surprised, before returning his attention to the muddy road. "Different? From Paul and Julie, they—" Rachel hesitated. "They're cruel, you're not." A sad smile appeared on Carl's face. "Maybe because my mother was different from theirs," he replied after a moment. "Laura, my father's current wife, and Paul, and Julie's mother is a bitter woman. My mother Esther was kind. She died when I was 5 years old." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. Another piece of the puzzle. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "It's not something I talk about often," continued Carl, as if a floodgate had opened. "My father changed after she left. He became hard, relentless. The ranch grew, but at what cost? People lost their lands, families were destroyed." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Rachel realized that, despite being the son of the most powerful man in the region, Carl carried his own burdens. "Is that why you're always absent?" she asked. "I rarely see you in town." Carl nodded. "I prefer to stay away. I study veterinary medicine in Portland. I only come home during vacations, and I spend most of my time with the animals. They're better company than many humans." Animals. The word hit Rachel like a sudden realization. Her inexplicable connection with animals, especially with Thunder. Could it be possible that Carl shared something similar? "Do you take care of Thunder?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Carl's eyes lit up for the first time. "Yes, he's my responsibility. He's an extraordinary animal, you know. My father bought him almost 18 years ago when he was just a calf. No one can tame him completely, except me." 18 years. Rachel was 17. The coincidence didn't go unnoticed. "What's special about him?" Carl seemed eager to talk about the subject. "He has an almost human intelligence sometimes, and he seems to feel things that other animals don't feel." The jeep slowed down as it approached Sophie's farm. The rain had diminished, but the sky was still heavy with dark clouds. "Thanks for the ride," said Rachel when Carl stopped the vehicle. He nodded, seeming reluctant to let her go. "Rachel," he called when she already had her hand on the door handle. "Be careful. Something's happening at the ranch, something I don't completely understand. My father has been acting strangely in the last few weeks, and Paul seems more dangerous." The genuine concern in his eyes touched Rachel. "What do you mean?" "Paul has been watching you, talking about you with the foreman. I don't like the way he looks in your direction." A shiver ran down Rachel's spine. Why would he care about me? I'm just a country girl. Carl shook his head. "I don't know. Just stay alert, please." Rachel nodded, getting out of the jeep. As she walked toward the house, she felt the weight of Carl's gaze on her back. Something told her he would be important in the days to come, an ally amid the brewing storm. On the porch, Grandma Sophie was waiting, her face pale and marked by tears. Upon seeing Rachel, the old woman seemed to age 10 years in seconds. "You heard, didn't you?" she asked with a trembling voice. "You heard our conversation." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't need to. The tears that returned to stream down her face said everything. Grandma Sophie opened her arms, and Rachel ran to them as she did when she was a child after a nightmare. But this time the nightmare was real, and there was no way to wake up. "Forgive me, my girl," sobbed the old woman, caressing her granddaughter's wet hair. "I just wanted to protect you." "Protect me from what, Grandma?" Rachel moved away to face her grandmother. "From knowing who I am? From knowing my father? From knowing the truth about what he did," Grandma Sophie replied, her voice rising. "About how your mother suffered at the hands of that family." The living room, small and cozy with its worn furniture and old picture frames, now seemed like a battlefield where secrets of almost 2 decades would finally be revealed. "Then tell me," demanded Rachel, her chest heaving. "Tell me everything. I'm not a child anymore, Grandma. I deserve to know where I came from, who I am." The rain began to fall heavily again outside, as if the sky wanted to provide the appropriate soundtrack for the moment when the last veil of innocence would be torn from Rachel's life. Grandma Sophie sat heavily in the old cracked leather armchair, indicating for Rachel to do the same on the sofa across from her. Her eyes, normally clear, were clouded with painful memories that, for so long, she had tried to keep buried. Grandma Sophie took a deep breath, preparing to unearth the past that, for so many years, she had kept hidden. "Your mother, Helen, was the most beautiful young woman in Riverdale," she began, her voice faltering. "She worked as a seamstress, making the finest clothes in the region. That's how she met the Parkers." Rachel listened attentively, each word filling the void of a story that was never told to her. Laura Parker, Eugene's wife and Paul and Julie's mother, hired Helen to make dresses for the family. "Your mother went to the ranch 3 times a week." Grandma Sophie paused, her eyes lost in memories. It was inevitable that Eugene would notice her. Helen had that light, something that attracted people. "Like me with animals?" Rachel asked softly. The old woman nodded. Yes, though in a different way. Your mother had a gift for understanding people, for seeing beyond the masks, and Eugene, despite being married, began to court her in secret. Helen resisted at first, but Grandma Sophie sighed. He was persistent, and charming when he wanted to be. The rain outside had diminished to a fine drizzle, the sound of drops on the roof a melancholy counterpoint to the narrative. The meetings began in secret. Helen was in love, believed that Eugene would leave Laura for her. He made promises. So many promises. And my mother believed him, concluded Rachel, a knot forming in her throat. We all believed in Eugene back then, replied her grandmother with bitterness. He wasn't the cruel man he became. The change came after Esther, his first wife, and Carl's mother left. Carl mentioned that she passed away. Grandma Sophie raised her eyes, surprised. Carl, you spoke with him. He brought me home. He found me near the ranch in the rain. The old woman shook her head, concerned. Be careful with that family. Rachel, all of them. Carl may seem different, but Parker blood runs in his veins. As it runs in mine from what I've discovered, retorted Rachel with a hint of resentment. Grandma Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, as if seeking strength. Helen discovered she was pregnant when the relationship had already lasted almost a year, she continued. She was radiant. She thought Eugene would finally acknowledge the relationship, but when she told him... The old woman's voice failed. Rachel could see the pain in the wrinkles that deepened on her face. He rejected her? She asked, though she already suspected the answer. Worse. He accused her of trying to trap him, said the child wasn't his. Grandma Sophie's voice trembled with contained anger. Laura, the wife, discovered everything. I don't know how. But she found out. The scandal broke. Helen was thrown off the ranch, publicly humiliated. Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. She imagined her mother, young and pregnant, facing the merciless judgment of a small town. But that wasn't the worst, continued Grandma Sophie. Eugene, to save his marriage and reputation, began to spread terrible rumors about Helen. He said she had seduced not only him but various men in town. He transformed the victim into the villain. A sob escaped Rachel's lips. The cruelty of the situation suffocated her. Why did she leave then? Why did she leave me? The pain on Grandma Sophie's face was almost physical. Helen. She couldn't. Bear it, my child. The pressure, the gossip, the looks. No one hired her services anymore. No one spoke to her. It was as if she had ceased to exist. And then... The old woman stopped, as if arriving at a precipice she was afraid to cross. And then, insisted Rachel. Laura Parker came to our house one night. She was furious, disturbed. She accused Helen of bewitching Eugene, said she knew she had powers, and she threatened. What kind of powers? Threatened how? Grandma Sophie trembled now, reliving the memory. She said if Helen didn't disappear from town, she would ensure that the child... Her voice failed. That you would never be born. She had connections, power. She could make it look like an accident. Rachel covered her mouth with her hands, horrified. Helen left the next morning, continued Grandma Sophie, tears now flowing freely. She went to Portland, stayed with a distant cousin until you were born. Afterward, she tried to start over, get a job, build a life. But the mark of what happened here was too deep. What happened to her? Asked Rachel, though a terrible presentiment was already forming in her heart. She fought, my child, fought bravely for 3 years, raising you alone. She sent me news, photos. Grandma Sophie wiped away tears with a worn handkerchief. But depression consumed her. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rejection, it was too much to bear. She passed away? Rachel's voice was barely more than a whisper. Grandma Sophie nodded slowly. One day, I received a phone call. Helen had given up. She couldn't bear the suffering anymore. I went to get you in Portland and brought you here away from the memories, where I could raise you in peace. Rachel felt as if the whole world had collapsed on her shoulders. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had been a victim of a cruelty that eventually consumed her. And Eugene Parker, her biological father, had been the architect of this tragedy. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked, her voice choked. "I wanted to protect you, my girl. This town has a long memory. But as long as no one knew who your father was, you could grow up in peace, without the stigma of what happened." Grandma Sophie looked at her with moist eyes. "And I was also afraid the Parkers would try to take you from me if they knew the truth." Rachel stood up abruptly, walking to the window. The rain had stopped, and the sky was beginning to clear, revealing the last rays of the setting sun. "And now Eugene appears wanting to acknowledge me? After everything he did." "He's sick, Rachel," explained Grandma Sophie. "Terminal. The doctors have given him a few months. I believe he's trying to clear his conscience before he goes." A bitter laugh escaped Rachel's lips. "Convenient. And what does he want now? For me to accept him as a father, to forgive him? He wants to include you in his will, legally recognize you as his daughter." The revelation hit Rachel like a punch. She hadn't expected this. "He wants to give me money." "Land, actually," corrected Grandma Sophie. "A significant part of the ranch. He said it's your birthright." Rachel shook her head, incredulous. "And Paul and Julie, do they know about this?" "No, according to him, and that's why I fear for you, my daughter. When they find out," Grandma Sophie swallowed hard, "Paul especially won't accept sharing the inheritance." A new silence settled between them, heavy with implications. The world Rachel knew had completely transformed in a matter of hours. She wasn't just Grandma Sophie's granddaughter, the country girl with an inexplicable gift for animals. She was also Eugene Parker's daughter, heiress to an empire built on land and blood. "And the buffalo?" she suddenly asked. "What's Thunder's connection to all this?" Grandma Sophie's face paled. "How do you know about that?" "He showed me things when I touched him. Memories that aren't mine. I saw my mother. I saw Eugene, young. What's happening to me, Grandma?" The old woman seemed to age 10 years in seconds. "Your mother had a gift, Rachel. A gift that few understood. She could feel others' emotions, foresee things that hadn't yet happened." She paused as if weighing each word. "Eugene bought Thunder the day he discovered Helen's pregnancy. It was to be a gift for you two, for the family they planned to form together. But when everything fell apart, the animal stayed," completed Rachel, the pieces fitting together. "And somehow he stored memories, energy, whatever it is I'm feeling." Grandma Sophie nodded slowly. "Helen always said that animals are portals to other kinds of knowledge. They feel what we cannot verbalize. They carry our stories in ways we don't fully understand." Rachel sat back down, trying to process everything she had discovered. Her head spun with so many revelations, so many layers of a story that had been hidden for almost 2 decades. "What am I going to do now, Grandma?" she asked, her voice small like a child's. Grandma Sophie extended her wrinkled hand, holding her granddaughter's firmly. "You have options that your mother didn't have, Rachel. You can deny Eugene, turn your back on all this and continue your life, or you can face your past, claim what is rightfully yours, and put our lives at risk. Paul and Julie won't simply accept me." "No, they won't," agreed the old woman. "But perhaps it's time for Riverdale to face its own demons, to bring to light everything that has been hidden for so many years." Rachel took a deep breath, feeling a resolution grow within her. "I want to meet him," she declared. "I want to look into the eyes of the man who destroyed my mother's life, and understand why he's doing this now." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Grandma Sophie stood up, leaning on her cane, and walked to the entrance. Rachel heard low voices, and then her grandmother returned to the living room, her face tense. "It's Carl Parker. He wants to speak with you." Rachel's heart accelerated. For a moment, she hesitated, but something in her gut told her that the brother she had just discovered would be crucial in what was to come. "Let him in," she said, wiping away tears and raising her chin. The sun had completely set when Carl entered the living room, bringing with him the smell of damp earth and an expression that Rachel couldn't decipher. He was no longer just the youngest Parker son before her. He was her half-brother, a bridge between two worlds that from that moment on would begin to collide. Carl entered the small living room with hesitant steps. His eyes scanned the simple environment before fixing on Rachel, whose face still bore traces of recent tears. "Sorry for the hour," he said, staying near the door. "I didn't mean to disturb, but I needed to check if you were okay." Grandma Sophie observed the young man with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. There was something in Carl's manner, a genuine gentleness that completely contrasted with the image she had of the Parkers. "I'm fine," Rachel replied, her voice firmer than expected. "Thank you for bringing me home earlier." An uncomfortable silence settled in the room. Carl seemed to want to say something more but hesitated, as if weighing each word. "I'll prepare some tea," announced Grandma Sophie, breaking the tension. Before leaving, she cast a significant look at her granddaughter, a silent message. "Be careful." When they were alone, Carl finally approached, sitting in the armchair that Grandma Sophie had occupied moments before. "Something's happening, isn't it?" he asked, leaning forward. "At the ranch, with my father. He came back different today after visiting you." Rachel studied the face of the man before her. She looked for traces of herself, of her mother, any indication of the connection she now knew existed between them. The same light brown eyes, she realized, the same chin shape. "Why do you care?" she asked, instead of responding directly. "You barely know me." Carl seemed surprised by the question. "I can't explain it," he admitted after a moment. "I've always had intuitions about people, situations. And since I first saw you, near Thunder, I felt there was something important. Something I don't fully understand." Intuitions. The word echoed in Rachel's mind. The same gift her mother possessed, that she herself manifested with animals. Could it also be present in Carl? "Your father is sick?" she asked abruptly. The surprise on Carl's face was evident. "How do you know that? He doesn't tell anyone, not even Paul and Julie know the extent." "He has little time," continued Rachel, feeling a strange detachment when speaking about the man who was her biological father. "And he's trying to settle accounts before he leaves." Carl paled. "Rachel, who told you this? Nobody besides me. And the doctor knows the complete diagnosis." A sudden impulse took hold of Rachel, a courage she didn't know she possessed. Perhaps it was the revelation of her origins, perhaps the inexplicable connection with Thunder and the memories she had experienced, or perhaps it was simply the weariness of a lifetime of half-truths. "He's my father," she said, the words sounding strange on her lips. "Eugene Parker is my biological father." Shock transformed Carl's face. His eyes widened, and for a moment it seemed he had forgotten how to breathe. "What?" he finally managed to articulate. That's not possible. He had an affair with my mother Helen almost 18 years ago. When she became pregnant, he rejected her, denied paternity." Rachel's voice trembled slightly, but she continued. "Your stepmother, Laura, threatened my mother. She fled to Portland, where I was born." Carl stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of disbelief. "My God, that would explain so many things," he murmured, more to himself than to Rachel. "What things?" He turned to face her again, a new understanding dawning in his gaze. "My father, in the last few weeks, has spent hours reviewing old documents, talking to lawyers. I thought he was just putting his affairs in order because of the illness, but—" He paused, as if connecting invisible dots. "And the way he looks at you when he sees you in town, I always thought it was just, well, you know how men look at pretty girls." Rachel felt her face flush, but maintained her composure. "He came here today to formally acknowledge me," she continued. "He wants to include me in his will, give me part of the ranch." Carl let himself fall back into the armchair, stunned. "Paul will go crazy," he said, running his hand over his face. "Julie too, but Paul, he has plans for the ranch. Expansion, modernization. He's counting on the complete inheritance." "That's why I ran to meet Thunder today in the rain," explained Rachel. "It was a shock to discover all this at once, and something drew me to him, as if he had answers." Carl looked at her with a new intensity. "You feel it too? The connection with animals?" "All my life," admitted Rachel. "Grandma says I inherited it from my mother, that she also had a gift." A sad smile formed on Carl's lips. My mother used to say I was special, that I could understand animals in a way no one else could. He hesitated, as if assessing whether he should continue. When she left, this gift was my refuge. Animals. Don't lie, don't betray, don't abandon. The parallel between their stories didn't go unnoticed by Rachel. Both had lost their mothers early. Both had found comfort in an inexplicable connection with animals. Both lived in the shadow of Eugene Parker, in different ways but equally profound. We're siblings, said Rachel, testing the word. Half-siblings. Carl nodded slowly, the reality of the situation finally settling in. What do you intend to do, he asked. Accept his offer? Become a Parker? The question caught Rachel by surprise. She hadn't thought that far ahead. The discovery itself was already overwhelming enough. I don't know, she admitted. I don't want his money nor his lands. I just wanted to understand, know where I come from, who I am. Rachel, Carl's voice became grave, you need to be careful. Paul is not someone who easily accepts challenges. If he finds out... I'm afraid, she admitted, vulnerability escaping through the armor of determination she was trying to maintain. Not for me, but for my grandmother. She has suffered so much. Carl rose and, in an unexpected gesture, knelt before Rachel, taking her hands in his. Listen to me. You're not alone in this. Not anymore. The intensity in his gaze was almost palpable. We are siblings, as you said, and regardless of what you decide to do, I'll be by your side. Emotion formed a knot in Rachel's throat. For 17 years, it had been just her and Grandma Sophie against the world. The idea of having an ally, a brother, was as strange as it was comforting. Why? She managed to ask. Why would you help me against your own family? A sad smile appeared on Carl's lips. Because I knew your mother, he replied, surprising. Rachel. I was very young, maybe 5 or 6 years old, but I remember her. Helen would come to the ranch for Laura's clothing fittings. She always brought sweets for me, secretly. She had the kindest smile I've ever seen. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. A memory of her mother, a precious fragment she had never possessed. She was kind? The kindest person I've known besides my own mother, confirmed Carl. And when I see you with the animals, with Thunder especially, it's as if I see her again. The kitchen door opened, and Grandma Sophie returned with a tray containing 3 cups of tea. Her gaze alternated between Carl and Rachel, assessing the situation. He knows, Grandma, said Rachel softly. I told him everything. The old woman nodded, placing the tray on the center table. And how did you react to the news of having a sister? She asked Carl directly, the distrust still present in her voice. With surprise, Mrs. Sophie, but also... He hesitated, searching for the right words, with a strange feeling that, somehow, I always knew. Their gazes met, and something seemed to pass between the old woman and the young man. A mutual understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of a shared truth. What happens now? Asked Rachel, breaking the moment. Carl sat back down, accepting the cup of tea that Grandma Sophie offered him. My father wants to see you tomorrow at the ranch, he revealed. It was the last thing he told me before I left. He asked me to take you if possible. A chill ran down Rachel's spine. To the ranch, where Paul and Julie are. They'll be in town tomorrow, agricultural fair. Carl took a sip of the tea. It would be the perfect time for you to talk in private. Grandma Sophie set her cup down forcefully on the saucer. It's a trap, she declared. I don't trust him, nor should I trust you, she added, looking at Carl. Grandma. No, Rachel. Eugene destroyed your mother. What would stop him from doing the same to you? He's different, Mrs. Sophie, intervened Carl gently. The illness has changed something in him. There's regret, remorse. Remorse doesn't bring... Helen back, retorted the old woman with bitterness. A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the wind had risen again, rustling the leaves of the trees in the yard. I need to go, Rachel finally said. I need to look into his eyes and ask, why now, why after so long? Grandma Sophie sighed deeply, resignation replacing anger in her countenance. You're stubborn like your mother, she said, with a touch of nostalgia in her voice. When Helen decided something, There was no force in the world that could make her change her mind. A small smile appeared on Rachel's lips. It was rare to hear her grandmother speak of her mother in that almost affectionate tone. "I'll take her personally, Mrs. Sophie," assured Carl. "And I'll bring her back safely. You have my word." The old woman studied the young man's face for a long moment. "You have her eyes, you know," she finally said. "Esther's, the same kindness, the same light." The surprise on Carl's face was evident. "You knew my mother?" "Riverdale was smaller back then, young man. Everyone knew everyone." Grandma Sophie paused. "Esther was a good woman. She deserved better than Eugene Parker." The information seemed to hit Carl like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice suddenly tense. Grandma Sophie exchanged a look with Rachel, as if assessing how much she should reveal. "It's not my place to tell that story," she finally said. "Ask your father, tomorrow when he's in a confessing mood." Carl seemed to want to insist, but something in the firmness of the old woman's gaze stopped him. "I'll be here at 9, he said, standing up. "If you still want to go," he added, looking at Rachel. She nodded, accompanying him to the door. "Thank you," she said softly when they were on the porch. "For not reacting badly. For believing you," he completed with a gentle smile. "Hey, it's the least I can do after 17 years of involuntary absence, little sister." The word brought an unexpected warmth to Rachel's chest. "Until tomorrow, then," she said, watching him walk to his jeep parked at the entrance to the farm. When she returned inside, she found Grandma Sophie still sitting on the sofa, her gaze lost in distant memories. "Don't trust him completely, Rachel," warned the old woman. "Nor, Eugene, remember that they are Parkers above all." "And I am too, from what I discovered today," replied Rachel, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "No," Grandma Sophie raised her gaze, her tired but firm eyes. "You are Helen Sullivan's daughter. Never forget that. Parker blood may run in your veins, but your heart is all your mother's." That night, lying in her simple bed under the wooden roof that leaked in the corners when the rain was heavy, Rachel felt as if she were suspended between two worlds. On one side, the simple and honest life she had always known with Grandma Sophie. On the other, the world of the Parkers, with their lands, power, and secrets. Tomorrow, she would cross the border between these worlds. And something told her that once that was done, nothing would be the same again. The morning dawned clear, as if the previous night's storm had washed away all traces of clouds from the Riverdale sky. Rachel watched the sunrise from her bedroom window after a night of restless sleep and confused dreams. In each of them, the big black buffalo appeared, its deep eyes full of secrets yet to be told. She dressed carefully, choosing her best skirt and a light blue blouse that her grandmother had sewn last winter. It was nothing compared to the fine clothes she imagined Julie Parker wore, but it was the best she had. As she brushed her long brown hair in front of the small cracked mirror, she wondered what it would be like to meet Eugene Parker not as Grandma Sophie's granddaughter, but as his biological daughter. In the kitchen, she found her grandmother already up, preparing strong coffee on the wood stove. Grandma Sophie looked her up and down when she entered. "You look pretty," she commented, serving a cup of the dark coffee. "But you don't need to dress up to impress those people." "I'm not trying to impress anyone, Grandma," replied Rachel, sitting at the rustic table. "I just don't want to look inadequate." The old woman let out a resigned sigh. "You will never be adequate for them, my child. Not by their standards, and that's not a bad thing." Silence fell between them as they drank their coffee. The unspoken words weighed more than any conversation. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" Grandma Sophie finally asked. "I can go with you." Rachel held her grandmother's wrinkled hand on the table. "I need to do this alone, Grandma. Carl will be with me." "Carl," repeated the old woman, skepticism evident in her voice. "A Parker. He seems different, kind." "Eugene also seemed kind when he met your mother," Grandma Sophie reminded her bitterly. Before Rachel could respond, the sound of a vehicle approaching reached them. Through the kitchen window, they saw Carl's jeep parking in front of the farm. "The time has come," murmured Rachel, standing up. Grandma Sophie stopped her for a moment, holding her arm. Remember who you are, Rachel Sullivan. Don't let them transform you into something you're not. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind as she walked to the jeep where Carl was waiting. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a checkered shirt and work boots, quite different from the expensive attire Paul usually displayed in town. "Good morning," he greeted her, opening the passenger door for her. "Ready?" Rachel nodded, casting one last look at Grandma Sophie, who was watching from the porch with a tense expression. The road to the Parker Ranch was familiar to Rachel, though she had never passed through the main gates. The dirt road wound through verdant hills, and, with each curve, the imposing ranch house became more visible on the horizon. A colonial two-story construction, all in wood and stone, surrounded by well-kept gardens, and a huge barn to the side. "It's bigger than I imagined," commented Rachel, when they passed through the wrought iron gates with the intertwined initials, PR. "It's quite old," replied Carl, following the elm-lined avenue that led to the main house. "The original construction is over 100 years old. My great-grandfather built it when he arrived from the north. And it's always been with the Parkers?" Carl gave her a sidelong glance. "Not always. There were acquisitions over the years, not all friendly from what I know." The insinuation didn't go unnoticed. Rachel knew from the town's stories that the Parkers had expanded their lands through methods that weren't always ethical. They parked near the staircase that led to the house's front porch. As she got out of the jeep, Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. She was entering enemy territory, an enemy that, ironically, was her own blood. "My father should be in his office," informed Carl, guiding her up the staircase. "He rarely leaves it since he learned of the diagnosis." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, antique dark wood furniture, oil paintings of landscapes and stern-looking ancestors. Everything exuded a discreet opulence, the kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself because it's impregnated in every detail. Carl led her down a long corridor to an intricately carved oak door. He knocked softly before opening it. "Father, I've brought Rachel, as you asked." The office was a spacious room, with bookshelves covering 2 entire walls and a large window that offered a view of the ranch's fields. Behind a massive desk, Eugene Parker looked up from some documents he was reading. The man Rachel had seen the day before seemed to have aged even more in the span of 24 hours. The pale face, the sunken eyes, the subtle tremor in his hands, all signs of the disease that was consuming him. Still, there was an undeniable aura of power in his presence. "Rachel," he said, his voice weaker than she remembered, but still carrying authority. "Thank you for coming." Carl glanced at his father and then at Rachel. "I'll leave you alone," he said, heading for the door. "No." The word escaped Rachel's lips before she could contain it. The idea of being alone with Eugene suddenly terrified her. Carl stopped, looking questioningly at his father. "It's all right," conceded Eugene, with a nod. "You can stay, Carl. Perhaps it's better this way." An uncomfortable silence hung in the room as Eugene studied Rachel intently. She held his gaze, refusing to show the nervousness she felt. "Please sit down," invited the patriarch finally, indicating a chair in front of the desk. Rachel obeyed stiffly, maintaining an erect posture. Carl remained standing near the door, a silent but reassuring presence. "You look like her," commented Eugene after a moment. "Like Helen, you have the same eyes." The mention of her mother's name on that man's lips provoked a wave of contradictory emotions in Rachel. Anger, sadness, curiosity. "Why now?" she asked directly, without preamble. "Why after 17 years?" Eugene didn't seem surprised by the frankness of the question. He leaned back in his chair, fatigue evident in every line of his face. "Because I'm leaving." A sad smile appeared on his lips. "Truth is an uncomfortable companion when you're facing the end, Rachel. All the mistakes, all the decisions, they gain a different weight." "My mother left alone and pregnant," said Rachel, her voice trembling slightly with contained emotion. "You accused her, humiliated her, destroyed her reputation." A glimpse of pain crossed Eugene's countenance. "Yes," he admitted simply, "I did all that, and more." The frankness of the confession caught Rachel by surprise. She had expected denials, justifications, not this direct admission of guilt. "I was a different man then," continued Eugene, "ambitious, selfish. When Helen told me about the pregnancy, He paused, gathering strength. "I panicked. Laura was consolidating her power in the family. Paul and Julie were small. A scandal, an illegitimate child, could make me lose everything. So you chose your empire over your own daughter," concluded Rachel, the bitterness evident in her voice. "Yes," repeated Eugene, holding her gaze. "The worst decision of my life, one I've carried with me all these years." Carl, who until then had remained silent, finally spoke. "You always knew about her father, all this time?" Eugene directed his gaze to his youngest son. "Not in the beginning. Helen left town without saying where she was going." He turned back to face Rachel. "When your grandmother returned with you. 3 years later I heard rumors, but I kept my distance. I convinced myself it was better that way." "Better for whom?" challenged Rachel. "For me, obviously," admitted Eugene with brutal honesty. "Not for you, nor for Helen." The mention of her mother's name again brought a lump to Rachel's throat. "She suffered because of you." Eugene lowered his eyes for the first time, unable to sustain his daughter's accusing gaze. "I know that. And there's nothing I can do to change the past, Rachel. Nothing can bring Helen back or undo the harm I caused." "Then what do you want from me?" she asked. "Forgiveness? Absolution before you leave?" "No," replied Eugene, his voice firm despite his physical weakness. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I want is to do what I should have done 17 years ago, acknowledge you as my daughter, give you what is rightfully yours." He took an envelope from the desk and extended it to Rachel. "This is the new will. 1/3 of the Parker. Ranch will be yours when I'm gone. The eastern portion, including the creek and the lands where Thunder usually grazes." Rachel made no move to take the envelope. "I don't want your lands." "It's not my lands I'm offering, Rachel. It's your legacy, your birthright." Carl stepped forward. "Do Paul and Julie know about this?" A shadow crossed Eugene's face. "Not. Yet I plan to tell them tonight after the fair." "They'll never accept it," pointed out Carl. "You know that, Paul especially." "Paul will need to accept it," replied Eugene firmly. "It's my final decision." Rachel shook her head, incredulous. "Do you really believe this fixes everything? That a signature on a piece of paper erases what you did to my mother?" The old rancher stared at her with an intensity that made her involuntarily retreat. "Nothing fixes what I did, Rachel. Nothing brings Helen back." His voice faltered momentarily. "But you're here, and while I still have time, I want to at least ensure you receive what is yours." A heavy silence fell over the office. Rachel felt divided between anger over the abandonment and the strange sensation of finally being face to face with the man who was her biological father. "There's one more thing," said Eugene, taking a small wooden box from a drawer. "This belonged to your mother. She left it here before she left." Rachel accepted the box with trembling hands. Upon opening it, she found a delicate silver necklace with a buffalo-shaped pendant, meticulously crafted. "It was a gift I gave her when I found out about the pregnancy," explained Eugene, his voice low. "It represents protection in local folklore. I had promised I would protect you both." A broken promise, thought Rachel bitterly, as she ran her fingers over the small silver buffalo. Its resemblance to Thunder was remarkable. "And what about Thunder?" she suddenly asked. "What's his true story?" Eugene exchanged a significant look with Carl before responding. "Thunder is special. He always has been. I bought him the same day I gave that necklace to your mother. The calf and the pendant came from the same breeder, an old man from the mountains who spoke of ancestral connections between certain animals and certain souls." Rachel raised her eyes from the box, intrigued. "What kind of connections?" "Totems, guardians," he called them. Eugene made a vague gesture with his hand. "I'm a practical man. I never gave much credit to those stories, but Helen, she believed. And when Thunder arrived at the ranch, something strange happened." "What?" insisted Rachel when he hesitated. "The animal recognized her, followed Helen everywhere even though." He was just a cuff. It was as if they were connected somehow. Eugene looked out the window toward the fields. When she left, he fell ill. Refused food, water. The veterinarian said he wouldn't survive. But then I was born, completed Rachel. The pieces fitting together. Eugene nodded slowly. On the exact day you were born, according to Grandma Sophie's calculations, Thunder recovered, inexplicably, as if he sensed your arrival into the world. The revelation hit Rachel like a wave. The connection she felt with the buffalo since their first encounter, the visions, the sense of familiarity, everything now gained a new meaning. "That's why he's so different with me," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. "That's why I feel he knows me." "He does know you," confirmed Eugene. "In a way I don't fully understand. Helen said he would be your protector, your guide. At the time I thought they were just the fantasies of a young woman in love. Now," he looked deeply into Rachel's eyes, "now I'm not so sure anymore." The sound of vehicles approaching broke the moment. Carl walked to the window, his body instantly tensing. "It's Paul," he announced, turning to his father. "And Julie, they've returned early from the fair." Eugene's face paled even more, if that was possible. "They weren't supposed to be here now," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Then, addressing Rachel, "Perhaps you should go. I'll speak with them first. Prepare the ground." But it was too late. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, and the office door opened abruptly, revealing Paul Parker, followed by his sister Julie. Both stopped, surprised, upon seeing Rachel. "What is she doing here?" asked Paul, his gaze alternating between Rachel and his father. Rachel felt the blood freeze in her veins at the look of pure contempt that Paul cast her way. In her hand, she still held the box with the buffalo necklace, visible evidence of the secrets that were about to come to light. Eugene Parker's office, normally a sanctuary of silence and power, transformed into the epicenter of a storm that had been brewing for almost 2 decades. Paul remained at the door, his body tense like that of a predator about to attack, while Julie entered with calculated steps, her cold eyes examining the scene with suspicion. "I asked what this country girl is doing in your office, Father," repeated Paul, his voice laden with disdain. Rachel felt the impulse to stand up and leave, to flee from this confrontation for which she wasn't prepared. But something kept her firmly in the chair, perhaps the buffalo pendant she now squeezed tightly in her palm, or the encouraging look that Carl gave her from across the room. Eugene adjusted himself in his chair, a shadow of his former authority, returning to his posture. "Rachel is here at my invitation, Paul," he replied with studied calm. "We have matters to discuss." "What kind of matters could you have with Sophie's granddaughter?" intervened Julie, approaching and stopping beside her brother. Her gaze traveled over Rachel from head to toe, as if evaluating merchandise of little value. Rachel held Julie's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. Deep down, a voice whispered, "She is your sister too. Your blood." "Family matters," replied Eugene, his voice firm despite his apparent frailty. Paul let out a dry laugh devoid of any humor. "Family?" He looked at Rachel with renewed interest. "What are you talking about, Father?" Carl took a step forward, subtly positioning himself between Paul and Rachel. "I think we should all sit down and talk civilly," he suggested, his calm voice contrasting with the palpable tension in the room. "Stay out of this, little brother," cut off Paul without taking his eyes off Rachel. "Unless—" A malicious smile appeared on his lips. "Ah, I see. You and the country girl, is that it? Are you having fun with the farm girl?" The insult hit Rachel like a slap. Before Carl could respond, she stood up, directly confronting Paul. "My name is Rachel," she said, keeping her voice firm despite her racing heart. "And no, there's nothing between me and Carl. It would be strange considering we're siblings." The silence that followed her words was absolute. The expression of shock on Paul's face would be comical in other circumstances. Julie visibly paled, her mask of superiority momentarily forgotten. "What did you say?" Paul finally managed to articulate, his voice no more than a whisper. Eugene sighed deeply, passing his trembling hand over his tired face. "This wasn't how I planned to tell you," he admitted. "But since we're all here—" "Yes, Paul, Julie, Rachel, is my daughter." Julie staggered backward, grabbing the edge of a bookshelf for support. "This is absurd," she exclaimed. "Impossible." "It's the truth," insisted Eugene. "Rachel is the daughter of Helen Sullivan, with whom I had a relationship before she left town." Paul remained motionless, his face a mask of contained fury. "Helen Sullivan?" he repeated slowly. "The seamstress, the whore that Mother threw out of here?" The insult to her mother lit a flame inside Rachel. She advanced a step toward Paul, but Carl gently restrained her by the arm. "Don't call her that," warned Carl, his voice low but laden with a rarely demonstrated authority. "Not in front of me, and certainly not in front of her daughter." Paul ignored his brother, turning to his father. "Are you senile? Is that it? Has the disease finally affected your brain?" His voice rose with each word. "Or has she bewitched you too, like her mother, like the witch she was?" "Enough!" Eugene's voice thundered through the office, surprising everyone with its sudden strength. "I will not tolerate anyone speaking of her like that, nor of Rachel, not in this house." The 1. Patriarch slowly stood up, supporting himself on the desk. Even debilitated by the disease, he still carried an aura of authority that made Paul involuntarily retreat. "Helen wasn't what you think, Paul, what your mother made you believe." His eyes briefly met Rachel's before continuing. "She was an extraordinary woman who I was fortunate to know, and unfortunate enough to deeply hurt." "Why are you doing this now?" asked Julie, recovering part of her composure. "After all these years, why bring up this story?" Eugene walked with difficulty to the window, looking out at the verdant fields of the ranch. "Because I'm leaving, Julie, and before I go I want to correct at least one of the many mistakes I've made." He turned to face his children. "Rachel will receive 1/3 of the ranch, the eastern portion including the creek and the adjacent pastures." A heavy silence followed his words, finally broken by Paul's incredulous laughter. "Now I understand everything," he said, turning to Rachel, with a calculating look. "Well played, girl. How long did it take to convince him? To fabricate this convenient story?" "I didn't invent anything," replied Rachel, indignation showing in her voice. "I didn't even know who my father was until yesterday, when your visit to our farm made my grandmother finally tell me the truth." "A very convenient truth, don't you think?" intervened Julie, recovering her pose of superiority. "Appearing just now when father is ill, claiming to be a lost daughter." Carl shook his head, exasperated. "Look at her, Julie. Really look. Don't you see the resemblance? The same eyes as father, the same face shape." Julie studied Rachel with a new interest, a shadow of doubt crossing her countenance as he— "That proves nothing." "I have more than enough proof," declared Eugene, returning with slow steps to his desk. "And I've already made my decision. The new will is drafted. 1/3 for Paul, 1/3 for Julie, 1/3 for Rachel. Carl has already received his portion when he turned 21, as you know." Paul advanced to the desk, banging his hands on the polished surface. "I won't allow this," he exclaimed. "This land has been in the Parker family for generations." "And Rachel is a Parker," replied Eugene calmly, "whether you accept it or not." The tension in the air was palpable. Rachel observed the confrontation with a mixture of fascination and horror. These people, these strangers full of anger and bitterness, were her biological family. They shared her blood, as much as the idea disturbed her. "If you do this, I'll contest the will," threatened Paul, straightening up. "I'll go to court. I'll expose this whole farce." "That's your right," replied Eugene with surprising serenity. "But it won't change anything. I have all the necessary evidence to establish paternity. And besides—" He exchanged a significant look with Carl. "There's the buffalo." The mention of thunder seemed to momentarily destabilize Paul. What does that animal have to do with anything? Rachel felt the pendant in her hand warm up, as if responding to the mention of the buffalo. "Thunder. Here's come special," said Carl, choosing his words carefully. "We've always known that, the way he came to the ranch, his connection with certain events." Julie stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? He's just an old and temperamental buffalo." "He's much more than—" That intervened Rachel, surprised by her own audacity. "He's a guardian, a protector." Paul let out a sarcastic laugh, but there was a touch of nervousness in his gaze. "Now she's going to tell us she talks to animals? That she's some kind of country witch like her mother?" "Paul!" Eugene's voice was like a whip. "I will not permit more insults." But Paul was already beyond the point of control. "You're giving away 1/3 of our ranch to this intruder, a country girl who appears out of nowhere claiming to be your daughter." He turned to Rachel, his face contorted with fury. "What else do you want? What else will you take from us?" "I don't want anything," replied Rachel with sincerity. "I came here only to learn the truth about my parents, about who I am." "About who you are," repeated Paul with disdain. "You are nobody. Just the bastard daughter of a seamstress who seduced a married man." The cruelty of the words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She felt tears forming, but refused to shed them in front of that man. "Enough, Paul," said Carl, advancing toward his brother. "Leave before you say something you'll regret." "Regret?" Paul laughed, a cold and calculated sound. "The only one who should regret anything here is our father, for betraying our mother with a nobody, and now trying to legitimize the fruit of that mistake." Eugene rose abruptly, his face red with anger. "Enough!" he shouted, before being overcome by a heavy cough. He leaned on the desk, struggling to catch his breath. Carl ran to help his father, while Rachel remained paralyzed, observing the scene with horror. Julie, after a moment of hesitation, also approached her father. "See what you caused?" she accused, casting a venomous look at Rachel. Satisfied now? Rachel felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. She wanted to run, to flee from that house, from that family full of hatred and resentment. But something kept her firm. Perhaps the small silver buffalo in her hand, perhaps her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. "Remember who you are." Eugene partially recovered, pushing away Carl's solicitous hands. "I'm fine," he murmured, before directing his gaze to Paul. "You have two options, son. Accept my decision and treat your sister with the respect she deserves, or contest it and face the consequences." "Consequences?" challenged Paul. "What consequences?" A sad smile formed on the old rancher's lips. "Secrets, Paul. This family has many of them. Some that you would prefer remained buried." Something in Eugene's tone made Paul visibly pale. A tense silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the corner of the office. "This isn't over," Paul finally said, retreating toward the door. "Not by a long shot." He turned and left with large strides, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Julie hesitated, torn between following her brother and remaining with her father. "He's just shocked," she finally said, addressing Eugene in a softer voice. "We both are. It's a lot to process at once." Eugene nodded wearily. "I know, daughter. I ask that you try to understand, and with time accept Rachel as part of the family." Julie cast an appraising look at Rachel, less hostile than before but still distant. "I'll try," she finally said, before following in the direction her brother had taken. When she left, Rachel released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The buffalo pendant seemed to burn in her palm, and she opened it to observe it. The small silver figure shone under the light coming through the window. "I'm sorry about that," said Eugene, sitting down heavily again. "Paul has always been difficult, temperamental, like Laura." "He hates me," stated Rachel, surprised by the calm in her own voice. "And he doesn't even know me." "He hates what you represent," corrected Carl gently. "A threat to the world. He has always known. To the story he has always believed." Rachel looked again at the pendant in her hand. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "You are Helen Sullivan's daughter. Never forget that." Maybe I should go," she finally said. "Go back home. This was a mistake." "No," Eugene's voice was surprisingly firm. It wasn't a mistake, Rachel. It was the beginning of a course correction. Something I should have done a long time ago. He extended his hand across the desk, a hesitant, almost timid gesture. After a moment of hesitation, Rachel placed her hand over his. The old rancher's hand was cold, the bony fingers delicately, tracing the lines of her palm. "You have her hands," he murmured almost to himself. "The same lines, the same touch." Rachel felt something break inside her. Not forgiveness, and it was too early for that, but perhaps the beginning of an understanding. This man, this father she had never known, was as complex as the story that united them, neither totally villain nor remotely hero. Distant neigh and the sound of heavy hooves interrupted the moment. Carl ran to the window, his body instantly tensing. "It's Paul," he announced, turning with an alarmed expression. "He's heading toward Thunder's Corral, and he has a shotgun." Eugene tried to rise quickly, but his legs weakened. Carl caught him before he fell. "What does he intend to do?" asked Rachel, an icy terror spreading through her chest. "End everything," replied Eugene, his face pale with concern. "His way." Rachel didn't think twice. On impulse, she ran out of the office, descending the stairs of the house at a frantic pace. Behind her, she could hear Carl shouting her name, but she didn't slow down. Something inside her, a force she didn't completely understand, propelled her forward. She knew, with an inexplicable certainty, that she needed to reach Thunder before Paul. The afternoon sun bathed the ranch's fields with a golden light, contrasting with the darkness Rachel felt growing inside her chest. She ran along the dirt path that led to the corrals, her lungs burning with the effort, but unable to slow her pace. In the distance, she saw Paul walking with large strides toward the isolated large corral where Thunder was kept. The shotgun, in his hands, reflected the sunlight, a metallic presage of his intentions. "Paul!" she shouted, forcing her voice to the maximum. "Stop!" He turned briefly, his face contorted in an expression of hatred upon seeing her. He quickened his pace, determined to reach the corral before her. Rachel felt the buffalo pendant she still held warm in her hand, almost like a living extension of Thunder. Without thinking, she deviated from the main path, cutting across the open field in a straight line toward the corral. Her feet seemed to barely touch the ground as she ran, propelled by a force that went beyond adrenaline. Carl had reached the jeep and was accelerating along the dirt path, trying to intercept. His brother. Julie observed from afar, paralyzed on the house's porch. While one of the employees helped Eugene down the stairs, the patriarch determined to prevent the tragedy that was unfolding. Rachel reached the corral seconds before Paul. She placed herself in front of the gate, arms open, heaving chest but defiant look. "Get out of the way," ordered Paul, pointing the shotgun downward, but with his finger on the trigger. "This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," she replied without moving. "You're not going to hurt him." Paul laughed, a cold sound without humor. "That wild beast should have been put down years ago. I always knew there was something wrong with him. The way he looks at people, as if—" He hesitated, an almost imperceptible tremor in his voice. "As if he knew things." Inside the corral, Thunder moved restlessly, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. The immense black buffalo seemed to perfectly understand the danger of the situation. "He does know things," confirmed Rachel, never diverting her gaze. "Just as I know, as my mother knew." "Witchcraft," spat Paul, partially raising the shotgun. "Mother always said your mother had a pact with the devil, that she bewitched my father." Rachel took a step forward, despite the fear she felt. "It wasn't witchcraft, Paul, it was love, something perhaps you've never experienced." The rawness of the observation hit Paul like a physical blow. For a moment, his mask of hardness wavered, revealing something vulnerable underneath. At that instant, Carl arrived with the jeep braking abruptly and jumping from the vehicle. "Paul, put down that weapon now," he ordered, approaching cautiously. "Stay out of this, little brother," replied Paul, regaining his composure. "This is between me and—" He waved the gun in Rachel's direction. "Our new little sister." "It's between all of us," said Julie, surprising everyone with her arrival. She had come down from the house and now approached slowly. "This family already has too many secrets, Paul. Violence won't solve anything. Paul looked at his sister with astonishment. You're on her side. Now? After everything we just discovered? Julie stopped beside Carl, her eyes revealing an internal conflict. I'm not on anyone's side, I just don't want more tragedies in this family. A loud snort drew everyone's attention. Thunder moved agitatedly in the corral, as if responding to the growing tension. Rachel felt the pendant warm again in her hand. He's trying to tell us something, she murmured, more to herself than to the others. It's just an animal, exclaimed Paul, exasperated. A damn buffalo that father insists on keeping despite being useless to the ranch. He's not just an animal, said a new voice. Weak, but authoritative. Everyone turned to see Eugene approaching slowly, supported on the arm of an employee. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with a fierce determination. Thunder is Rachel's guardian, continued the patriarch. Always. Has been. Since the day she was born. Paul lowered the weapon slightly, confused. What are you talking about, father? The old man from the mountains who sold me Thunder warned me, explained Eugene, approaching with faltering steps. Said, the animal was destined to protect someone special, someone with the gift. What gift? Asked Julie, her curiosity overcoming her reserve. Eugene looked at Rachel, a sad smile on his lips. The same gift Helen had, the ability to feel, to see beyond what ordinary eyes can see, to connect with the land, with animals, with people. More of this witchcraft talk, mocked Paul, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. It's not witchcraft, intervened Carl firmly. It's something older, deeper, something our family forgot over the years, in its pursuit of power and wealth. Rachel felt the pendant pulse in her hand, as if it had a life of its own. Without thinking, she walked to the corral gate and opened it. Thunder came out slowly, his immense body moving with surprising grace. Paul raised the shotgun, instinctively. Carl moved forward to stop him, but it was Julie who placed her hand on the barrel of the weapon, forcing him to lower it. Look, she said softly, indicating the scene before them. Rachel was standing in front of the immense black buffalo. She extended her hand, the silver pendant shining under the sun, and Thunder lowered his powerful head, gently touching his snout against her palm. The instant they touched, something extraordinary happened. A soft light seemed to emanate from the point of contact, visible to all present. It wasn't blinding or supernatural, but a soft luminosity, like that which precedes dawn. My God, murmured Julie, bringing her hand to her mouth. Paul let the shotgun fall to the ground, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Eugene observed the scene with tears in his eyes. Helen, he whispered, as if he could see the ghost of the woman he had loved before him. For Rachel, the world around her momentarily disappeared. In her mind, she saw images, her mother young, smiling, running through the fields with Eugene. The moment she discovered the pregnancy, the tears when she was rejected, and finally, the moment she held her newborn daughter in her arms, promising that she would never truly be alone. When the vision dissipated and Rachel returned to reality, she realized she was crying. Silent tears streamed down her face as she maintained contact with Thunder, who observed her with almost human eyes in their understanding. He was the link, she finally said, turning to the others. The link between me and my mother, between me and this land. Paul was motionless, as if all his certainties had been shaken in a single moment. Julie approached hesitantly, stopping a few steps from Rachel. You saw our mother? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Rachel shook her head. I saw mine, Helen, and I saw the man your father was when he met her. She looked at Eugene, who was now openly crying. A man capable of loving, before fear and ambition transformed him. Carl slowly approached Thunder, extending his hand as Rachel had done. The buffalo allowed the touch, though without the same intense connection he had demonstrated with the young woman. I always knew there was something special about you, said Carl softly to Rachel, from the first time I saw you with him. Eugene walked with difficulty to where Paul had dropped the shotgun, He picked up the weapon and handed it to the employee who had accompanied him, with instructions to put it away. "The time has come to end the secrets," he declared, looking at each of his children. All of them. Paul finally seemed to awaken from his trance. "Father, no," he began, but Eugene interrupted him with a gesture. "The truth, Paul, we all need it, no matter how painful it may be." He turned to Rachel, who still kept one hand. "On Thunder, your mother didn't leave just because she was rejected," he said, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "She left because she was threatened by Laura." Julie swallowed hard, avoiding everyone's gaze. "What did Mother do?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "She threatened Helen," continued Eugene, the weight of the confession visible in every line of his aged face. "Said that if she didn't disappear, she would ensure that that Rachel would never be born." A horrified silence fell over the group. Even Paul seemed disturbed by the revelation. "Mother would never do that," he finally said, but without the conviction of before. "She would, and you know it," replied Julie softly, surprising everyone. "We've always known how she could be relentless when she felt threatened." Carl looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent behind the hills. "That's why we never talked about Helen at the ranch," he concluded. "Why this silence? All these years it wasn't just an extramarital affair, it was much more." Eugene nodded heavily. "When I learned of the threats, it was already too late. Helen had left, and my pride, my fear of scandal—" He looked directly at Rachel. "I was a coward, and you and your mother paid the price." Rachel felt the weight of that confession, of that story finally revealed. There was no joy in the truth, only the possibility of healing, of moving forward. "What do we do now?" asked Julie, breaking the silence that followed. Eugene looked at the four young people before him, his children all together for the first time. "We start over," he replied simply, "as a family, if possible, or at least as people who share the past, however painful it may be." He turned to Paul, who remained apart, arms crossed defensively. "The ranch will be divided, as I mentioned. 1/3 for each of you." His voice gained firmness. "It's non-negotiable, Paul, and if you try to contest it as you threatened, I'll reveal everything. Every secret, every questionable act our family has committed over the years. Including yours?" Paul visibly paled. For a moment it seemed he would protest, but then his shoulders fell in defeat. "Do as you wish," he said bitterly. "You always have, anyway." He turned and began walking toward the house, but stopped after a few steps. He looked over his shoulder, not at his father, but at Rachel. "Don't expect me to accept you as a sister," he said, his voice more tired than angry. "Not after all this." Rachel held his gaze. "I don't expect anything from you, Paul. Not your name, not your acceptance, not your love." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But I do expect your respect, if not for me, for the memory of my mother." Something indefinable passed through Paul's gaze. It wasn't acceptance, certainly not affection, but perhaps it was the beginning of an understanding. Without responding, he continued his way to the house. Julie hesitated, torn between following her brother and remaining. Finally, she approached Rachel. "It won't be easy," she said, avoiding looking directly at her newly discovered sister. "Building whatever we might build from here." "I don't expect it to be," replied Rachel. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Julie nodded slightly before moving away, following the path Paul had taken, but with slower steps, as if weighing each movement. Carl remained at Rachel's side, a constant and comforting presence. Thunder had moved a few steps away but remained close like a silent guardian. "What will you do?" asked Carl gently. "With your portion of the ranch?" Rachel looked at the land around her, the verdant pastures, the distant creek where the setting sun reflected in golden tones, land that apparently would soon be hers. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I need to talk with my grandmother. She's the only family I've known all my life." Eugene, who had been observing the interaction in silence, finally approached. "Your grandmother will always be your family, Rachel, just as—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Just as I would like to be, for the little time I have left. Rachel felt a lump in her throat. There wasn't complete forgiveness in her heart, not yet. The abandonment, her mother's suffering, were wounds too deep to be healed so quickly. But there was, perhaps, room for a new beginning. "I'll try," she finally said, the same words Julie had used, simple, honest, without grand promises. Eugene nodded, accepting the response for what it was. Not a complete reconciliation, but a door left ajar. "It's all I can ask." The sun was descending rapidly now, painting the sky in tones of red and gold. Thunder returned near Rachel, as if sensing it was time to depart. "I need to go home," she said. "My grandmother must be worried." "I'll take you," offered Carl. Immediately. As they walked back to the jeep, with Eugene slowly returning to the main house, Rachel stopped to look once more at the ranch, the imposing mansion, the verdant fields, the buffalo now watching her from afar. A world she never imagined would be partially hers. "You know, Carl," she said as they got into the vehicle, all this wealth, it wasn't what I wanted." "What did you want then?" he asked, starting the engine. Rachel looked at the buffalo pendant in her hand, the last rays of sun reflecting on the silver. "To know who I am, where I come from, and now I know." On the way back to the farm, as the jeep traveled the rural roads of Riverdale, Rachel felt a strange peace settle in her heart. It wasn't happiness, not completely. There was still much pain, many questions, many adjustments to make. But it was a beginning. In the distance at the Parker Ranch, Thunder watched the jeep move away, his deep eyes reflecting the last gleam of the setting sun. In her chest, Rachel felt the silver pendant like a promise. Wherever she went now, whatever path she chose, she would never be completely alone again. Grandma Sophie was waiting on the porch when the jeep parked in front of the farm. Her wrinkled face was marked by worry, but her eyes quickly assessed Rachel's expression. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked simply, when her granddaughter climbed the porch steps. Rachel looked back, at Carl still in the jeep, at the horizon where the Parker Ranch rose in the distance, and finally at the pendant in her hand. She smiled, a small but genuine smile, the first since this whole journey began. "I found it, Grandma. Not what I expected, but perhaps what I needed." She hugged her grandmother tightly, feeling the familiar scent of lavender and earth that she had always associated with home. Whatever her future now, as Rachel Sullivan, as Rachel Parker, or simply as Rachel, she knew she carried within herself the strength of 3 generations of women: Helen, Grandma Sophie, and her own, newly discovered. And that, more than any land or fortune, was the true legacy she had claimed that day. "Let's go inside," said Grandma Sophie softly. "I have a lot to tell you about your mother. Good things this time, stories I saved for the right moment." "I'd love to hear them," replied Rachel, feeling a tear escape, not of sadness but of renewed hope. As they entered the small house under the starry sky that was beginning to form, Rachel knew the story hadn't ended. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. For her, for the Parkers, for Riverdale. And this time she would write her own story, with the strength of her past and the promise of her future intertwined, like the invisible threads that had always connected her to the land, to the animals, and now finally to the truth about her origins.